From loving wife to wealthy stepmother, my ex's father became my husband and left his fortune to our adopted daughter. Hi, I'm Elaine, and if you're reading this, maybe you're looking for stories of life's unexpected turns, or perhaps you just stumbled upon my tale of twisted fate. Either way, here's my story, as real and raw as it gets. I married Grant straight out of college. We were those high school sweethearts everyone thought would last forever, carried by dreams bigger than our small town ever contained. We moved to the city, got decent jobs, and rented a tiny apartment with views of brick walls and buzzing streets. Life was ordinary, our love extraordinary, or so I thought. We wanted a family, expected it to be easy. After all, everyone around us seemed to be announcing pregnancies and posting baby pictures. But as months turned into years with no success, our initial excitement waned, replaced by a growing desperation. That's when we turned to fertility treatments, our hope rekindled by science and stories of miracles. Little did we know, we were embarking on a journey that would strain our finances and our bond beyond what I thought possible. Fertility treatments aren't just medical procedures, they're a roller coaster of hope and despair. Each cycle was a symphony of hormone injections, endless doctor visits, and the agonizing wait for results. And with each failure, a piece of our shared dreams crumbled. The cost was astronomical, and we were slowly drowning in debt. But Grant insisted, driven by a fatherly longing. I saw a flare in his eyes every time a friend announced a new baby. Then, almost 3 years into our journey, at the peak of our struggles when the emotional and financial toll seemed insurmountable, Grant broke down. He came home one evening, his face ghostly pale and his hands shaking, and said he couldn't do this anymore. He confessed that the burden was too much, that he was overwhelmed by the debt and the repeated disappointments. He said he needed a break from it all, from the treatments, from our mounting debts, from me. I pleaded, fought, and cried, but nothing could change his mind. The next day, while I was at yet another doctor's appointment clinging to hope, Grant packed his bags and left. There was just a note on the fridge, cold and impersonal, saying he was sorry, but he needed to find himself again. The weeks following Grant's departure were a blur. I was left alone, not only nursing a broken heart, but also facing a mountain of debt that we had accumulated from the fertility treatments. The bills didn't stop coming, the calls from the bank became more frequent, and the silence of the apartment was suffocating. I had lost my husband and the chance at the family I had dreamed of. My friends tried to be supportive, but no one really understood the depth of the betrayal I felt. I was not only abandoned by the man I loved, but left to deal with the consequences of our shared dream alone. It was more than just the financial ruin. It was the emotional wreckage that kept me up at night. I felt deceived and discarded, like a broken tool tossed aside after it had lost its use. As the reality of my situation sunk in, my days became a routine of managing creditors, legal consultations to handle our debts, and the endless loop of what-ifs. I isolated myself, embarrassed by my failed marriage and the pitying looks of those who once envied my seemingly perfect relationship. My job performance suffered, my social life vanished, and the bright, ambitious woman I once was seemed like a stranger to me now. In those dark days, I started writing. At first, it was just journal entries, a way to vent and process my emotions. But soon, those entries became long posts on online forums, and I found solace in sharing my story with strangers who turned into friends. They didn't judge, they listened, and slowly, I started to feel a part of something again, a community that held me when I was too shattered to hold myself. That's where my story takes its first turn, where my path crossed with someone unexpected, leading my life in a direction I never anticipated. But that part comes later. For now, just know that while some stories start with once upon a time, mine starts with a broken heart and a shattered dream, but it doesn't end there. Not by a long shot. Several years after Grant left, I found myself slowly picking up the pieces of my life. The debts were finally under control, thanks to a combination of relentless budgeting and some unexpected freelance projects. I'd also thrown myself into building an educational nonprofit, a dream that had germinated during those long, lonely nights. It was during a fundraiser for this cause that my path took an unexpected turn. The event was well attended, bustling with the city's elite, who were there more for the social clout than the cause. I mingled, smiled, and gave my rehearsed spiel about the importance of accessible education for underprivileged children. It was then that I met George, Grant's father, a man I knew of but had never met. He was a prominent businessman known for his philanthropy and estranged from his son over disagreements that now seemed petty in my long history of hurt. George approached me after my presentation, complimenting me on my passion and drive. We talked extensively about the nonprofit, and he shared his views on education reform, impressing me with his insights and genuine interest. He was nothing like the aloof figure Grant had often described. Over the next few months, George became a patron of the nonprofit, and our professional meetings gradually turned personal. I learned that his estrangement from Grant had hurt him deeply, creating a void that his wealth and success couldn't fill. He saw in me something that went beyond my connection to his son, a shared loneliness and a mutual understanding of betrayal and loss. Our friendship deepened, founded on long conversations about our pasts, our dreams, and our disappointments. With George, I felt seen in a way I hadn't since Grant left. He wasn't just listening, he was understanding, offering not just sympathy, but empathy. It was comforting and, admittedly, intoxicating. One evening, as we walked through a quiet garden after a charity gala, George stopped suddenly. Under the soft glow of the moonlight, he confessed his feelings for me. It was a moment of vulnerability neither of us had anticipated. The air was charged with the kind of electricity that comes from the collision of past pain with present possibility. After a pause that seemed to stretch into eternity, I admitted I felt the same. Our relationship evolved quickly from there, driven by a whirlwind of emotions we both hadn't felt in years. The decision to marry came naturally. It felt right, like a chapter that was meant to be written in our stories. When George proposed, it was simple yet profound, devoid of the elaborate gestures typical of his social stature. It was just us, and it was perfect. However, our bliss was not without its shadows. The news of our marriage sent shockwaves through the circles we frequented, particularly affecting Grant. When he found out, his reaction was explosive. He felt betrayed, seeing my marriage to his father as the ultimate act of disloyalty, not just from me, but from George as well. His anger was palpable, his words sharp and piercing. He accused us of mocking his pain, of using our marriage as a spectacle to highlight his own failings. Grant's reaction stung, but it couldn't overshadow the profound connection George and I shared. We married quietly, surrounded by a few close friends who understood our journey and supported our union. Becoming Grant's stepmother was a role I had never envisioned for myself, yet it was a reality I embraced with a resolve to make the best of the complexities it brought. The marriage marked a new beginning, but also set the stage for new challenges. As I navigated my role as George's wife and Grant's stepmother, I faced not just external criticisms, but internal conflicts about the web of relationships that now defined my life. This twist of fate was just the beginning of another chapter, one filled with as much promise as it had potential for pain. As the months went by, adjusting to my new role as George's wife and Grant's stepmother came with its own set of challenges. Family gatherings, which were supposed to be occasions of joy and reunion, turned into theaters of silent battles and unspoken tensions. Grant, who years later finally decided to make an attempt to return to his family, was unable to mask his disdain and often made dismissive comments or opted to ignore me completely. His discomfort was evident to anyone who paid attention, casting a shadow over what should have been happy occasions. Despite the awkwardness at these gatherings, I committed myself to make the most out of my relationship with George. We were happy, truly so, and our family soon grew with the adoption of Lola, a vibrant 3-year-old who brought new joy and purpose into our lives. The decision to adopt Lola was one born of our shared desire to nurture and give, perhaps a way to fill the quiet spaces our complicated family dynamics had created. However, our bliss was soon overshadowed by health concerns. George, always robust and energetic despite his age, began to show signs of weariness. After a series of tests, we faced the grim reality of his diagnosis: Parkinson's disease. It was a blow that neither of us had anticipated, and it transformed our lives almost overnight. As George's condition progressed, his physical capabilities diminished. With a steadfast resolve, I took on the role of his primary caregiver, balancing the demands of managing his health with the joys and responsibilities of raising Lola. The days became a blur of medication schedules, doctor's visits, physical therapy sessions, and moments of laughter and play with our daughter. I was determined to provide George with the best care possible, pouring my energy into his treatment and trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Lola. This period of our lives was bittersweet. While it brought us closer and deepened the bond within our small family, it also placed a spotlight on the fragile nature of life and love. George's illness made me realize the depth of my affection for him, which was far deeper than I had comprehended when we first married. It also highlighted the tensions with Grant, who seemed too alienated as he watched me care for his father and raise the daughter he perhaps once hoped would be his sister under different circumstances. Our interactions, rare and strained, were punctuated by his coldness and barely concealed hostility. The inevitable, however dreaded, finally happened. After a prolonged struggle with his illness, George passed away quietly one night, with me by his side. His death was peaceful, a small mercy in the long ordeal that had marked his final years. However, the peace that followed was short-lived. George had prepared his will with clear instructions, a document that reflected his wishes without ambiguity. To the shock of everyone, especially Grant, George left the entirety of his substantial estate to me, bypassing his only son. The revelation of the will created an uproar. Grant was furious, feeling cheated and betrayed not just by me, but more painfully by his father. He couldn't understand George's decision, taking it as a final rebuke from a father with whom he had shared a complicated and often strained relationship. Accusations flew, and harsh words were exchanged, further deepening the rift between us. Grant contested the will, claiming undue influence on my part, a legal battle that promised to be both public and messy. Friends and family chose sides, with most unable to grasp the full complexity of our family dynamics. I found myself vilified by some, pitied by others, and supported by a few steadfast friends who understood the genuine care and love I had provided to George during his illness. This period was one of intense isolation for me, compounded by grief over losing George and the stress of the ongoing legal dispute. Despite the turmoil, I held on to George's belief in me, his final loving act that had entrusted me with his legacy. I knew my next decisions would shape not only my future, but also affect how George's memory would be preserved and what life Lola would have. It was a responsibility I did not take lightly, one that I knew would define my path forward in ways I could not yet fully understand. The legal battle over George's will was both grueling and intensely personal. Sitting in the stark, cold courtroom day after day, I felt as if George's memory was on trial, not just his written wishes. Grant, driven by a blend of grief and betrayal, was relentless. His legal team argued that George was not in his right mind when he made his will, suggesting that my influence over his decisions was undue and manipulative. "It's not just about the money," Grant spat bitterly during one of our few direct confrontations outside the courtroom. "It's about him choosing you, always you, over his own son. How could he do this to me?" I understood his pain, but the harshness of his words stung deeply. "Grant," I said, trying to bridge the gulf of misunderstanding between us, "your father loved you, in his way. But this was his decision, based on what he felt was right. I didn't coerce him. I wouldn't." But my words fell on deaf ears. Grant's eyes, so much like George's yet filled with such different emotions, showed no sign of softening. "You took everything from me, not just now but always. My family, my chance at happiness. How can you stand there and claim innocence?" The court proceedings dragged on, with each session more draining than the last. Witnesses testified about George's mental clarity in his final months, doctors provided medical opinions, and our personal lives were dissected for any hint of impropriety. Through it all, I held on to the fact that I had loved George sincerely and had been his steadfast companion through his hardest times. Finally, the judge ruled in favor of upholding the will. It was a hollow victory, tainted by the family it had broken apart. With the legal battle behind me, I was left with the full weight of the inheritance and a decision about what to do next. Sitting in George's study one evening, Lola playing quietly at my feet, I thought about Grant, about all the pain and division, and about what George would have truly wanted. It was then that I made a choice that would finalize the rift, but felt profoundly right. I decided to transfer all the inherited wealth to Lola, setting it up in a trust that would ensure her future education and well-being. She was the innocent in all of this, a child who brought joy during our darkest days. I called Grant to tell him of my decision. "I want you to hear this from me directly," I started, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've decided to put the inheritance into a trust for Lola. It's what George and I would have wanted for her future." Grant's response was icy, his voice barely concealing his contempt. "You've decided? Just like that? To cut me out completely?" "It's not about cutting you out. It's about doing what's best for Lola. She deserves this chance." "And what about me? I'm his son, Elaine. His actual son." His voice broke, laden with a lifetime of feeling second best, unchosen. "This isn't about us, Grant. It's about making something good out of all the pain. Lola is part of your father's legacy, too. Can't you see that this is a way to honor him?" But there was no resolution to be found. Grant ended the call abruptly, and I knew that any chance of reconciliation had slipped away. The last ties binding us were severed, not just by legal documents, but by the raw, unhealed wounds of abandonment and betrayal. Sitting back in the leather chair that still smelled faintly of George's cologne, I felt a wave of sadness for all that had been lost. Yet, looking at Lola, her laughter pealing like a bell through the room, I also felt a resolve that I had made the right choice. For her, I would weather any storm, carry any burden. She was my future now, and I would protect that with all I had. In the quiet of the evening, as I watched Lola sleep, her small chest rising and falling with each breath, I often found myself lost in thought. The house, once filled with George's presence, now echoed with a mixture of silence and the new sounds of a child's laughter. These were moments of deep reflection for me, times when the weight of my past decisions lay heavily on my heart. Throughout this entire ordeal, my choices had been driven by a complex mix of emotions and responsibilities. I had loved George deeply, and his trust in me had been both a gift and a burden. Deciding to transfer all of George's wealth to Lola was perhaps the hardest decision I had ever made. It was a decision that prioritized Lola's future, but also severed what little remained of my connection to Grant. The moral and ethical dilemmas of my choices often kept me awake at night. Had I been fair? Was I too influenced by my strained relationship with Grant? These questions churned endlessly in my mind, and while I was confident in the purity of my intentions, doubt sometimes crept in, clouding my thoughts with uncertainty. My feelings towards Grant were a tangled web of sympathy, frustration, and regret. I understood his pain and the sense of betrayal he felt, not just towards his father, but also towards me. Yet, I also felt a profound disappointment in how he had handled everything, from the harsh words to the legal battles. There was a part of me that longed for reconciliation, for some acknowledgement of the shared history and affection that once bound us. But I knew that some rifts were too deep to mend, and perhaps this was one of them. As for Lola, she had become the center of my world. She was not just the child George and I had welcomed into our lives. She was a beacon of hope, a promise of renewal and joy amidst the wreckage of familial strife. My love for her was boundless, and in her innocence, I found a strength I didn't know I possessed. Every decision now was made with her best interests in mind, and I was committed to providing her with everything she needed to thrive, no matter the personal cost. Looking forward, I knew our path would not be easy. The scars of the past, the legal battles, and the broken family ties would always be part of our story. Yet, I also saw a future filled with potential and growth. I imagined Lola growing up strong and intelligent, nurtured by love and fortified by the lessons of resilience and forgiveness that our life story imparted. In this journey, I found a profound truth, that from the depths of despair and loss can come an unexpected path to healing and purpose. My future, intertwined with Lola's, was uncertain and uncharted, but it was ours to shape. And as I looked at her peaceful face each night, I felt a surge of hope that transcended the challenges we faced. The night air brought a chill as I closed the window, turning back to the quiet room where dreams were just beginning. Yes, the scars remained, but so did the possibilities of new beginnings and the enduring power of love. With Lola by my side, I was ready to face whatever came our way, armed with the wisdom gained from the battles fought and the peace that comes from doing what one believes is right.